If there's something strange in your neighborhood, who are you going to call? Oh, Ghostbusters, good. Somebody watched that fine piece of cinematography. Sometimes the most important thing that we can acquire is the knowledge to know who to call when we have a problem. Case in point, our home is heated by natural gas. We have a gas well about 125 yards from our house, and we get free gas from it. There's a gas line that travels underground from the well all the way to our house. It's our responsibility to maintain the gas line underground, the two separators on the line, the regulator in the line, and also the meter. If anything goes wrong with any of those, we have the responsibility of maintaining and repairing it. The winter after we moved in, something went wrong with the system. We couldn't get gas flow into the house. I have no experience and no knowledge about those kinds of things, and I didn't know what to do. We had no range or oven. We had no clothes dryer. We had, more importantly, no furnace. And temperatures were really cold then. I called the company whose name is on the well, but they reminded me that those things were my responsibility and not theirs, and there wasn't anything they could do. They suggested I contact a local heating contractor. So I called a few HVAC companies in the area, and they said they don't work on gas lines outside of the home. I called a couple of oil supply places in the Yellow Pages. They said they don't work on homeowner equipment. No one could give me the name of anyone to call. I thought about calling Ghostbusters. After all, there was something wrong in my neighborhood. Finally, I called the company back again, whose name is on the gas well, and they gave me the names of a couple of private contractors they had occasionally used to repair their equipment. And so I played eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and I called a guy named Owen. He came out and he cleaned all of our fittings. He replaced the meter, which was no longer working, but we still had no gas flow to the house. He reasoned that the lines underground must be plugged somewhere, and he suggested that he replace the entire line for us at a cost of around $2,000. So I called the other guy. His name was Jimmy. He came out, and he looked at the system. Our furnace by that time had been down for 7 days. Temperatures were below freezing at that point. We had been heating the house with portable electric heaters in a few different rooms and our fireplace, but we couldn't get the thermostat above 60 degrees. It was really cold in the house, and so I was desperate. Jimmy replaced the separator, and he put in a second separator in the system, and then he brought in a vacuum truck, and he sucked 3 gallons of petroleum fluid out of the line, which had been blocking the gas flow, and suddenly we had gas in our house again, and we had heat. Since then, Jimmy has helped me a few times over the phone with some problems I've had, given me some advice, given me some tips on how to maintain the system. And in the process of all that, he's taught me how that system works and enabled me to maintain it myself. If only I had called him first, but I didn't know who to call. Who do you call when you have a problem? An increasing number of people don't know who to call when they have problems in their life. Consequently, 911 calls are on the rise in our country. Many people believe that their problem qualifies as an emergency, and not knowing who else to call, they dial 911 for just about anything. For example, in 2018, a Cleveland man dialed 911 because a local Burger King would not honor his free Whopper coupon. Hey, who are you going to call, right? That same year, a man in Alameda, California called 911 because his internet went out. It seems he could no longer play Call of Duty with his buddies online, and that constitutes an emergency, obviously, right? In 2019, a Wisconsin woman called 911 because a Kentucky Fried Chicken employee had made her chicken sandwich wrong. Now, to be fair, they do advertise we do chicken right. So if they do chicken wrong, that's false advertising, which is clearly a police matter, right? Yeah. That same year, a Minnesota man called 911 because he was out of cheddar cheese for his lasagna recipe, and he needed help fast because he had dinner guests coming. What were they supposed to do? Go to the store and pick up cheese for him? Apparently, I don't know what an emergency is because I wouldn't have dialed 911 for any of those problems. Who do you turn to when you are desperate for help? A story in the Bible teaches us to turn to Jesus, reminding us how much we need him. This story that we're going to look at this morning teaches us that Jesus is our sustainer. That word means one who lifts up and supports another. It's someone who provides what you need when you are unable to provide it for yourself. Jesus is that person for us. He is our sustainer. He lifts us in our time of need. He provides us the help that we do not get anywhere else. And so we turn to him, for we need Jesus. We need Jesus when we are hurting. Let's read this story. It's found in Luke 7, begins in verse 11. Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Jesus is a friend to the brokenhearted. There are all kinds of pain in this world. Some of it is physical. Some of it is emotional. Some of that pain is untreatable. Some of it is pain we are unable to cope with. This lady was in deep pain, an untreatable pain. Perhaps she felt on the verge of being unable to cope with the fact that her only son had just passed away. It was a Jewish custom of that time to bury a person within 24 hours. They didn't have the body preservation practices that we have today in embalming a body so that it stays very lifelike looking for a long period of time. And so they put a person into the ground very quickly. And it's likely that this lady was still in shock. Just a day before, her son had been alive. And now she was taking him to the cemetery to put him in the ground. There is probably no more painful loss than that of losing a child. A few of you know what that pain is like. It is not the natural order of things. Children are supposed to bury their parents after 80 or 90 good years, not the other way around. The most heartbreaking funerals I conduct are those of children. We can justify to ourselves, reason among ourselves, that an elderly person has lived a good, long life. They've had many happy years. They've accomplished the things that they wanted to accomplish in life. Their life has been fulfilled. But we can't say any of those things about a child when he or she passes away. One mother in our community lost her young son 2 years ago. Her Facebook posts are still dominated by grief. We understand. Like her, this mother in our story in Luke 7 was surely distressed. Maybe especially so because this remaining son was her only family member. Society was not structured then to provide for a childless widow. There was no Social Security. There were no welfare programs. There were no government agencies for aiding elderly. There was nothing. Family was supposed to provide for those in their family who were unable to provide for themselves in their elderly years. But in her case, there was no one. She needed someone. She needed Jesus. There are hurts only he can heal. She had plenty of friends to comfort her. The text tells us that a large crowd accompanied her to the cemetery. But isn't there a limit on how much any person can help us in a time of deep grief like that? Two crowds met that day. One was a mournful entourage headed to the cemetery. They grieved a life cut short. A curtain of sadness hung over their procession. The other was a joyous group headed into the city. They were celebrating the arrival of a celebrity. Much anticipation and excitement followed that crowd. You see, life is like that. When you hurt deeply, you sometimes encounter others who are enjoying life. And it can be painful, a painful reminder of what you are missing. A young mother-to-be miscarries. She suffers silently, despondent over her loss. A few days later, her friend unknowingly boasts of the cutest thing her baby did. And it's painful. A funeral procession you are in passes by a playground. A young family is there, laughing and enjoying time together. You watch out the window and realize that your pain is oblivious to them. You wonder how anyone could enjoy life at a time like this. Even your friends, in a few days after the funeral service, will resume their normal routine of life and forget your hurt. And it's painful. Tony Campolo describes this part of human nature when he tells us what will happen at our funeral service. He says our friends will stand over our grave and talk about how much they miss us in somber tones. And then an hour later, they'll be back at our house laughing together and eating potato salad. Life goes on, and it's painful for those who are left in their grief. When you hurt, you need somebody who really understands your pain. C.S. Lewis, when his wife was dying, said, "I need Christ, not somebody who resembles him." Jesus hurts with us. He understands at a level no one else can. The text tells us, as we read, his heart went out to this mourning childless widow. Bible commentator William Barclay wrote about that phrase. There is no stronger phrase in the Greek language for sympathy than the one used of Jesus here. And it is used of him often in the New Testament. "Don't cry," he said to her. Have you ever wished you could take someone else's pain away, but felt unable to? That's one of my greatest frustrations when I do grief counseling. I always feel inadequate. I always feel like I fall far short of what is needed to help the person who is grieving. I can put my arm around them and sympathize with them. I can offer words of encouragement. I can tell them that I am praying for them, but it never seems to be enough. I want to take the pain away, but I can't. Bob Russell, a preacher whom I admire, tells of a time when a family in his church lost a child, and it was a family he was especially close to, and so he worked extra hard, and he wrote the best funeral sermon he had ever preached in his life. Afterwards, the mother of the child who had died said to him, "If words could have helped, Bob, yours certainly would have. But they were inadequate. There's nothing we can do to really heal the hurt. Only God can do that." When King Hezekiah was struck with a terminal illness, he cried in tears, asking for God's help. And God sent him an answer through a prophet. That answer is recorded for us in 2 Kings chapter 20 and verse 5. "This is what the Lord, the God of your father David says. I have heard your prayer and seen your tears, I will heal you. God makes that same promise to us. He feels that same hurt for us in our time of deep grief. In fact, David went so far as to point out how much God identifies with us, how much he knows about our grief and our suffering, when he wrote this in Psalm 56:8. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. Does anyone else count your tears? Does anyone else know each one that has dropped? Isn't there comfort in knowing that our Lord cares that much? Even though we are his people, we are not exempt from pain in this world. But we know that he cares when we hurt, and he comes to us with healing. Come to me, all you who are heavily burdened, he offered an invitation, and I will give you rest. We need that Jesus. We need the Jesus who is the burden bearer, the Jesus who is the healer of our hurts. We need Jesus when we need a miracle. Let's return to the story in Luke chapter 7 and pick up in verse 14. Then he went up, that is Jesus, he went up and touched the coffin they were carrying, and the pallbearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up! The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Jesus is the friend of the helpless. In each one of our lives, there are things that happen for which we are unable to deal with. Sometimes the only choice we have is to turn it over to God. We can't do anything else but to leave it in his hands, to trust him with it, and to trust that his will is right for us, and to give him the time that he determines to minister to us in our grief. This story in Luke 7 was one of those times. Only God could make a difference, and he did. Jesus restored the young man's life, but the people recognized that it was the work of God, for we read this in verse 16. They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. I hope you've experienced that. God coming into your life to help you. God making a difference. God providing the miracle you need. God coming to your aid when no one else could. God bringing you healing or a resolution that was otherwise unavailable to you. God giving you the strength to endure through the difficulty. He has surely come to our aid often. We need Jesus for that. There are problems only he can solve. I find the wording of the resurrection of this young man in this story interesting. It says, Jesus gave him back to his mother. Not Jesus gave him back to his life, gave him back his life, but Jesus gave him back to his mother. You see, it wasn't the boy's miracle. It was his mother's. She was the one in need. He was fine in an afterlife of reward, but Jesus interrupted that and restored him to his mother because she needed him. God is in the restoration business. He restores health to ailing bodies. He restores broken relationships. He restores hope to those who are in despair. He restores joy to sorrowful hearts. He restores blessings to those who have suffered loss. Only God can do that. One of my first thoughts in preparing this sermon as I read through this story and thought about its application to us was to offer you a disclaimer, as if I had to speak up in God's defense if he didn't come to your aid like he did exactly for this mother. And my disclaimer was something like this: God doesn't always perform miracles. So don't expect him to perform one for you, and don't be depressed or disappointed if he doesn't. But I rethought that because I believe God performs miracles all the time. Some of them are big miracles like this, and some of them are smaller ones. It would have been a miracle either way, whatever happened, whether this young man had risen to life on this earth again or whether he had risen to life in heaven. The fact that he rose to life after death was miraculous. Jesus merely chose one miracle over another in this case. And I think he did so for a reason. He brought that man back to what might look to us to be the bigger miracle, but I think was really the lesser one for the boy. He brought the young man back to life on this earth in order to show us that he is the Lord of life and that he has the power over death. He did it in order to teach us that we can have hope in a resurrection too, and to demonstrate to us how much we need Jesus. Two crowds met that day. Jesus and his followers were headed into the city. The mourners were headed to the cemetery. Spiritually speaking, each of us is in one of those crowds. If you have put your life in Christ's hands, you are going to the heavenly city, the one called the New Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 21. You are living a life of celebration. But if you have not, you are dead in your sin. You are living a life of mourning. But just like that young man, you too can be raised to life. For it is just as true today as it was then. God has come to help his people. We need Jesus for that. He has come to provide us the hope of resurrection. That there is life after death. That there is an eternity far greater than what we experience here in this world. That there is a hope that will remain undimmed no matter how terrible our circumstances might be. We need Jesus. He has come to be our life sustainer. And he hopes to sustain you through this life and throughout eternity if you'll accept him as your Lord.